Hey guys, this is Partha Srinivasan. I am the host of the East Podcast, and thank you for joining us for yet another episode here. As you know, the East Podcast aims to bring technology closer to your senses. We try and delve into what different technologies exist today, why they exist today, and we try and bring subject matter experts onto our show to try and pick their brains and talk about the different technologies that they are aware of. So we talk about different pieces of information like servers, data centers, coding for mobile apps, websites, maybe some concepts like artificial intelligence, 3D printing, robotics, and we try and simplify them for you. We also tackle a lot of different things like consumer technologies and maybe even a consumer product every now and then, depending upon what our mood is like. But today we're going to be talking about driverless cars, and I am joined by Rohit Jayakaran. So he has had a very interesting journey that's led up to why I have him on this episode. And we're going to be talking about driverless cars. So thank you for joining me, Rohit.
My pleasure, Partha. It's wonderful to be here.
Rohit, before we jump into this episode, tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey that led up to this discussion that we're having about driverless cars.
All right. So I'm actually a technology guy at heart. I've always loved technology. It's been part of who I am. A huge part of my life has also been spent in the content creation space. So I used to be a radio presenter. I used to be a content creator, creating social media content, digital content, and of course, radio content. And at some point in time, the technology part of my life kind of came together with the content part of my life. And I sort of moved into the digital space. So I was looking at digital and digital strategy and technology and the future of where our organization would go. And that was kind of something that took up a lot of my time. And one of the things that I was commissioned to do was to look at the future of radio in an era of driverless cars. Now, this is something that we were looking at 5, 6, 7 years ago. We were actually researching this and seeing what the future of entertainment would be in that sort of environment. So that kind of got me interested in driverless cars. And ever since then, I've been following the industry and the space very, very closely, and it's fascinating.
There's a lot that's murky around driverless cars. There are like these different levels that are happening. So maybe we could have a little bit of a history lesson as to why we started off into driverless cars and what are the different levels that exist right now?
So that's the interesting thing. This thing about why do we want driverless cars is a very interesting question. And I think we should probably tackle that a little later on, but let's make sure we get back to that question. But in terms of understanding the world of driverless cars, essentially, if someone says, I have level 1 automation in my vehicle, that means they pretty much drive any normal car on the roads today, because we started doing level 1 automation way back in the 1950s. This is things like ABS, cruise control, things like stability control. Essentially, it's when the car takes care of one specific function at one particular point in time. So like, for example, ABS, traction control, that would pretty much be what we would call level 1. But we've been doing this since the 1950s. And most cars have these right now.
Mm-hmm. These are things that would be considered as your driver assist sort of piece, right?
Yes, this is the basic bare minimum. I mean, there is a level 0, which is basically nothing. So I think we can just move to level 1, okay? And then you got a level 2. Now, the level 2 has been something that we've been talking about and working on since the 2000s. This is essentially things like automatic emergency braking. This is where the onboard computer in the car takes over partial control of one function at a particular point in time, and then it hands it back over to you. So you might be driving down a street, there's an obstruction, the car notices it assists you, and it helps apply that brake, or it supercharges your brake so that when you hit it, it'll actually stop the vehicle. Okay, now that's level 2 automation. That's still something that you see in most vehicles. It's not the cool stuff, the futuristic total recall kind of Minority Report kind of stuff.
So basically stuff like your adaptive cruise control that are there in the Hyundais and the Mercedes right now, your lane keep assist and all of these things are kind of partial automation.
So those are partial automation, but those would be what we would call level 3. Okay.
Oh, okay.
Now, level 3 is where you look at combining 2 or more features together and taking over control for a little bit of time or assisting in that whole process. This would be things like lane keep, where essentially you're driving down a highway, all of a sudden there's a vehicle in front of you. The vehicle is able to slow down slightly as part of your cruise control, and then the lane kind of turns to the right, and automatically the car actually just maintains that lane and continues on that path. That is level 3 automation.
So the Teslas.
Now, most of us want to think that the Tesla is a level 4, but in reality what it is, as far as I'm concerned, a level 3, because it does these things really well, like the autopilot. It's really exciting, but the presence of the human being is essential. That person needs to be sitting there. Without that person being part of that process, nothing really happens. Essentially,
Right.
You're literally in the driver's seat.
But again, I think Tesla have kind of certified themselves as a level 2 autopilot. I mean, the Tesla autopilot is literally classified as SAE Level 2. So I'm confused. So there's a lot of debate on this, possibly.
I personally feel a lot of gray areas when it comes to this because of which standards you look at. Now, if you read what SAE talks about, which is the Society of Automotive Engineers, they have quite a lengthy document that defines level 0 all the way to level 5. But it's got some interesting technical terms that are used there, which I personally feel, for a layperson like me, would cause a level of ambiguity.
Right.
The reality is the promised land for all of us is actually a level 5. But let's actually go into a level 4 before that. So level 4 automation is essentially where your car can drive on its own, but only in a certain operational area. Now, this could be a university campus, it could be in a small town, it could be a small city, it could be a neighborhood, it could be part of some sort of an industrial complex.
So basically anything that is kind of geo-fenced. So think Jurassic Park.
Yes, if you took that vehicle out of that space and tried to use it, it would probably crash within a few seconds because it doesn't have data that it requires to be able to do what it needs to do.
So a sort of controlled environment experiment, so to speak.
Yes. Now,
All right.
there's a good example of one of these. Waymo's doing this in Phoenix, Arizona, where it's a very controlled environment. They constantly go and map the streets, and they've trained the vehicle again and again on those streets, so it knows it really well. But if you take those vehicles out of that controlled environment, they probably aren't going to do as well.
So I think there's another company that's run by General Motors called Cruise.
Yes.
That they are doing a closed test as well. They made the announcement in San Francisco, but I'm unclear as to what location they launched this test on. But they've definitely announced it, and I know it's happening. So completely driverless,
Yes.
geo-fenced taxis.
Exactly. And that's sort of what Waymo is doing in Phoenix as
Arizona
well.
as well.
This is a great testing ground for you to be able to get to a level 5. Now, the challenge though is getting from a level 4 to a level 5 is actually a humongous task, because a level 4, and I do not want to say that level 4 is easy to do. It is complicated. It's really difficult, but you've got to think of it as the test lab conditions, where you're able to make sure that all the road markings are right, that people are aware that these vehicles are on the streets. A lot of different things that you do to make sure that everything's working right. You're constantly monitoring it. You're constantly making sure that the data that comes in is good. You're learning from it. There's a lot of machine learning in that process as well. And you're making it better and better. But moving from level 4 to level 5. Level 5 is very easy to define. It's a car that can drive on its own anywhere that a normal human being would be able to.
Right. Easy enough, you would think.
It's very easy to define. But that's where it's the biggest challenge that you will face in this process. Because imagine having an automated system running in San Francisco or in Phoenix. Now, let's say I want to do this same thing in Mumbai, in Bangalore, or in Indore.
Oh, Jesus.
Then I'm going to take this to Manila, and then I'm going to take it from there to Beijing. You understand that the complication, the difference in the way each of these...
And it would have to work perfectly in all of this, in every single environment.
Yes. Here's the other thing, right? With new drivers, right? Often when people get a driving license, you put a sticker on the back of your vehicle and you say new driver. In other words,
Correct.
Watch out. This guy might not be the smartest cookie on the road. So what happens is you're willing to understand, okay, he's a new driver, he doesn't know us yet, he'll get there. With driverless cars, you're not going to get that second chance. You take one of these vehicles into one of these urban areas and you claim that it's going to work. There are more people who are going to hope that it doesn't work and to bring it down than people who will support it. Our standards for machines and our standards for ourselves are completely different, think about it, right? When you were in school, right? And you were given one of these math sums. If you got it wrong, it was understandable. Hey, you're human. You're learning. Imagine if you typed in two numbers onto your computer and your computer gave you the wrong answer. We're not that forgiving, man.
No, that computer would see the ass end of the dustbin.
Yeah. So we're not as forgiving when it comes to technology, which is good. I think it's good because we need to make sure that things work and they work every single time and they work perfectly. But that's where jumping from a level 4 to a level 5 is very, very difficult. And this is where that challenge arises because our urban areas are not ready for driverless vehicles. I'd ask you to experiment with this. Walk down your street, okay? Just get out of your house, turn left or right, and just walk down the street. And as you walk, try to find pavements where you would walk, okay? Each time you have to get off the pavement and get on the pavement, try to think why you needed to do it. Was this because there was a manhole? Was this because there was a dustbin? Was this because there was a tile that was missing? Or was it just bad urban planning where they forgot to put the
actual pavement on the road?
Yeah. Now let me think like a computer. If I was a computer, how would I walk down that street? Because a computer is going to be programmed to look for a pavement. So which means it would reach the end and it would go, 1 second, cannot compute. What do? I can't move forward, can't move back. So then you're going to have to teach the computer to break the rules. Okay? Now, you and I are able to understand when it is okay to break the rule and when it's not. The problem is we cannot articulate that to a computer program in all fairness because it's very complicated. Yeah. How do we make the decision that I can get off this pavement, walk around this garbage bin, knowing that you're walking on a street? You make so many calculations that you've learned over a period of time. Now, it's not impossible to program a computer to do that. But you have to do it. And it takes a lot of time and energy and effort. And that's why I believe moving from a level 4 to a level 5 is a humongous task. And our world needs to gear up for that, which means urban planning needs to change the way we plan our cities, the way we standardize signboards, the way we standardize road markings. All of that needs to be done not for the human beings who've kind of figured out how to navigate this planet, but it's for the computers.
Correct.
It's one of those things that we did a few years ago. Number plates in India, for example, used to be hand painted, right? You would paint it and then you'd have this super nice font and you'd do this. But many years ago, the government standardized the way you wrote your number plate.
Yeah.
And that was not for the human beings. It was for the computer being able to do an image recognition on your number plate.
That's right.
It has tremendous benefits for us as human beings because now you can actually read the guy's number plate. But the reality is it was not done for us, but it benefited us. The same way, standardizing the way we have road markings, street markings, what are our standard traffic rules? This needs to be standardized across the board, which makes it a very, very complicated problem to get over because now urban planning needs to change to be able to meet the requirements of a self-driving car, which brings you to the important thing of how do you get all the stakeholders in this process to work together to do what needs to be done? You have to explain to them why you want self-driving cars.
Right. But before we jump into that, there's a lot that needs to be prepped as well. If you have to talk about environment, if you have to talk about a thought system, like the reactions to, what would this entail? There's so much that goes on into building an entire ecosystem for a self-driving car. Are we even humanly prepared for something like this?
I don't think at the moment. I think we have a lot more pressing challenges that we are trying to solve. And this is something that a few companies are spending a lot of time and energy and effort to kind of work through. And I'm sure they're not going to like what I'm saying, but I don't think they've found their why. Why are they doing this? Why are they spending so much time and energy and effort to be able to automate this whole car journey? Why are we looking at doing this? Now, if you look at most of the presentations that these companies make, they go down the route of there are so many accidents on streets every year. Okay? This is what motivates them. But for a technology to be truly successful, you have to find something that motivates the consumer who's going to buy this product. Nobody who buys a car ever believes that they're going to meet with an accident. You always want to believe that it'll never happen to me, it'll happen to somebody else. And so it's very difficult to motivate people to say, you need a self-driving car because you're a really bad driver and you're going to kill yourself. I don't think that's the motivation that people have. I think the guys who are working on a lot of this technology also forget that some of us love driving our vehicles. We love driving our cars. The other strange thing for me is the fact that people work very hard. This is not to support or to dismiss the pursuit of assets and monetary gain in life. But, you've worked hard. After a few years in your career, you want to be seen in a particular type of vehicle. With the whole driverless experience, a lot of this is not going to happen. You aren't going to really buy the car of your dreams.
It becomes moot, right? It becomes moot.
It also means that you probably don't need to have a car, because a car is one of these really weird assets, right? You use it in the morning, you use it once in the evening, and pretty much it sits outside your office and it sits outside your home for the rest of that time. And there's a school of thought where it says we could completely change the way this works. In other words, we actually have an entire sharing economy where your car drops you to work and then it goes, drives itself, picks up someone else, does something else for someone else, pays for itself essentially, and then comes back, picks you up and takes you back home.
So there are a couple of services that are in that space here in India. There's Zoom Drive and Revcar, and they offer this kind of a sharing economy wherein if you buy a car through there, or if you hire a car through their service, you could actually loan it out or put it back onto the system for the time that you're not using. And this is assuming you live on a certain time schedule, right?
Yeah.
So if you adhere to a time schedule, you're good. So like if you're at work without exception between 11 and 4, that car is on the market for anybody to use as long as they drop it back.
Yeah.
That currently is in play. Now, I don't know how successful it is. We'll have to look for data, but then it's there. So that sharing economy exists.
But here's the thing. With driverless vehicle, the cool thing is that the person who now requires this vehicle doesn't need to be exactly where you are. It automatically drives to that person, picks them up and does whatever it needs to. There's some amazing stuff that you can do. It fundamentally changes the concept of ownership and the concept of how we use our resources. The driverless car doesn't just change the technology of driving cars. It changes every facet of our lives.
So this brings us back to the question of, what are the industries that are affected by the onset of driverless cars? Like, where is it going? Like, what's going to happen?
Okay, so this is the part that I love a lot. There's so many things when it comes to cars and driving that we take for granted. Why does everybody in a car face forward? Okay, now that's because of the way cars are designed. The person who's driving needs to be able to see what's happening in front. The person to their right, by default, is facing in that direction. The guys at the back, now because everyone else is facing forward, there's no point them facing the other way. Now, imagine this scenario. You have a driverless vehicle, you have no steering wheel. All of a sudden, the front two seats could actually be facing back and the back two seats would be facing front. Imagine having a table in the middle of those people. Now, why do we have windows in a car? We'd love to believe that it's so that window tinting companies can make a buck. The reality is, it's all meant for the driver to be able to look at his surroundings.
Better visibility.
Yeah, visibility, which means I don't theoretically need windows anymore.
Fair enough.
I don't need a windscreen in front. So now it starts changing a lot of assumptions that we make, which means now I am sitting inside a small little space where I don't need a windscreen. Imagine the windscreen being converted into, say, a 75-inch LED screen. Now you can sit back, relax, and watch your favorite show streaming on Netflix. You see, you can watch full-fledged television on a full-screen display in a driverless vehicle. Not one of those 6-inch screens at the back of your driver's seat and the passenger seat that the kids are watching and you're like, dude, this is horrible. None of that. You're talking about a 75-inch LED screen inside a driverless vehicle. And that fundamentally changes the way entertainment is consumed in one of these vehicles. For me, that's fascinating because the assumptions that we make are based on the fact that we used to use horse-drawn carriages. And once the horse-drawn carriages got converted into cars, we pretty much maintained the same thing. Now, you could do anything inside that vehicle. Mm-hmm. It changes everything. You could actually have a table inside the car and you could actually eat your dinner like a normal human being. You could do so many different things. And I don't have the answers. I have the questions. And I would rather ask the questions because that way each of us can interpret the answers differently. And in there lies the opportunity for us to innovate, to create this exciting future.
All right, so let's do this as part of an exercise. Let's ask the questions right now. Let's put it out there into the social media and let's try and build a conversation where we're trying to understand what are people's expectations. And then if we find some really convincing or some very interesting pieces, let's get back onto another episode and try and actually dissect and introspect on those points and figure out, where they're coming from and probably either hypothesize what's next or figure out what's happening.
I think that works really well. In fact, one of the questions I'd like to ask as well is, why do we need self-driving cars?
Very interesting question.
And I know that the answer to this question is at the start of most presentations where it talks about the accident rate.
More than the accidents, I would say that it's a convenience factor, The fact that you could actually do so much more and use the time that you're stuck in traffic, probably in bumper to bumper, and you could actually have a car do some of that work for you. And you could actually focus on doing something more, like you'd see in the Jetsons, he'd get into the car, he'd shave, or you'd probably go pick up a meal and eat or something like that. So there's a convenience factor.
Here's the interesting thing, right? You mentioned this, and I'm just going to put this out there. You mentioned when you are in a self-driving car stuck in traffic. The reality is, if we reach a point in time where everyone is driving a level 5, or rather everyone is, now you're not driving a level 5 car. You are in a level 5 car and the car is driving you. You see how there's a difference in the way we say these things.
Yeah.
One, if everyone in a city or a town or on this planet is in a level 5 automation vehicle, which is what you see in Minority Report and a lot of these Total Recall movies and stuff. It's the future that these guys want to paint. If everyone is in one of these vehicles, remember that the very interesting thing that happens is something called V2X. Vehicle to everything. In other words, your vehicle talks to another vehicle. That vehicle talks to the traffic light. The traffic light talks back to this vehicle. And you'll find that once you reach that level of automation, everything in a city, in theory, should be talking to each other, which means it should create a high level of efficiency. In theory, you should not really be stuck in traffic.
So you're talking machine-to-machine communication, which is like essentially the Internet of Things.
Yes. This is a utopian world. I'm talking 2060, okay? I'm not talking next 5 years. I'm talking about you've reached a point where everyone is doing this, everything is talking to everything else. And at that point in time, in theory, you don't have traffic jams. Because one of the major causes for traffic jams is also accidents, which means if vehicles are talking to each other, you don't have as many accidents. Or in fact, you reach that point where I dare say you have no accidents, because that's why we said we needed this technology. And everything works smoothly and seamlessly. The reason we have traffic lights is because of our own human weakness. I believe if you reached a level 5 automation, you don't need traffic lights.
Because you won't have any traffic. That's true.
And the traffic would seamlessly move, because this vehicle tells the other one, hey, dude, I'm coming now. I'm driving past right now. He's like, okay, I'll slow down, go past. He moves past. As human beings, we're unable to do this.
No. It's not unable. Even though we have the ability, we will ignore that ability because guess what? I want to go first.
This is where I'm talking about is a very futuristic world where traffic lights don't exist. And honestly, mate, I'm just making this stuff up as we're speaking right now, because the more you think about that future, you suddenly realize there are so many different things that we take for granted, or we have automatically put into our world because of our own inabilities to actually deal with other things that don't need to be there. Right now, what do we think when we think of a driverless car? We think, hey, I can read. Till 15 years ago, you were saying, oh, I can read the newspaper in the car. Like, dude, we're not reading newspapers anymore. It changes, right?
It does.
I feel like if you want to imagine the world of the future, think about your car with a huge 75-inch screen and you not having to look outside the car. What would you do? I think we'd just watch Netflix. We'd be binge watching from one location to the other, because that's what we do.
Oh boy. All right, so I think that one question is enough to spark enough a big enough debate to kind of talk about where driverless cars are going, and obviously the offshoots of what driverless cars will do. I mean, if you talk about big data, you talk about machine to machine conversations, you talk about more efficiency of systems. I think all of these things will also mean that cities, countries, and governments need to think about better infrastructure. We need to think about better internet technologies, because communication uses wireless. So making sure we have the right kind of wireless technology is also very, very crucial. So all of these build up into that as well. But I think that is probably something that we're going to tackle in our next episode.
Okay.
Because there's just so much that we can talk about. That's just tremendous. Thank you very much, Rohit. I really appreciate this. Any passing comments?
I just say, Matt, for now, till we sort this stuff out, drive safe.
Drive safe. Well, Rohit, how can people get in touch with you? What's the best way they can connect with you?
You can catch me on Twitter. It's at Rohit Jayakaran. Pretty much on every other social media as at Rohit Jayakaran, because that's my name. And it was easy to get. There's nobody else fighting for that username. So you can catch me there. You can also go to my website, rohitjayakaran.com.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Rohit. Thank you very much, you guys, for signing in to the East Podcast. You can follow us on the East Podcast as eastpodcast.in. That's EASTPODCAST.in. And our episodes are all up there. We're going to be on all the social media. We're on almost all of the different podcast services. So feel free to sign up, subscribe, leave us your comments. Let us know if there's a special topic that you want us to cover. And we're happy to look for the right subject matter experts to come on and talk about it. Once again, Rohit, really appreciate this conversation.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much. And on that note, I'm going to sign off. Thank you very much and have a good day.